okay in his nightmare storm. Now, welcome to meeting 86 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and motion adopted by the committee on Monday, October 17, 2022, the committee is meeting on the study of the Arrivescam application. A reminder is always not to put earpieces near your microphones as it causes feedback and potential injury to our valued interpreters. Just a quick update. Just an update on the order for production of documents. We have received the items from Mr. Firth, and they are now sitting with the Translation Bureau. Before we start with Mr. Brock, I just want to welcome back Patrick as our chair for today. Patrick reminded me about 7-8 years ago he was our clerk on OGO, so welcome back. It's nice to have you back after so long. Anyways, we have Mr. Dwan with us. Do you have an opening statement, Mr. Dwan?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Brock. Just one moment, Mr. Dwan.
Before the opening statement, I made inquiries with members of the committee, and given the nature of the finger pointing and the attempts to cast blame on other parties as to who chose GC strategies, and given the RCMP investigation, without suggesting at any point in time that Mr. Dwan has attempted to mislead this committee, I think it prudent, sir, to have this witness sworn to tell the truth, or to affirm to tell the truth, whatever mechanism binds his conscience.
Certainly, thanks, Mr. Brock. I think there have been discussions among all the sides, and I understand we have an agreement for that. I see nods, so we have unanimous consent. So I'll turn things over to our clerk to administer.
So, Mr. Dwan, before we will have to swear you, so you will have to repeat after me. So, you will be like saying, I, your name,
I, Min Dwan,
do solemnly, sincerely, and truly affirm and declare the taking of any oath is according to my religious belief and lawful. I do also solemnly, sincerely, and truly affirm and declare that the evidence I shall give on this examination shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I confirm that the witness has been sworn in.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dwan, we'll turn things over to you for 5 minutes, please.
Sure. Good afternoon. Since giving my testimony, allegations have been made against me, and I thank the committee for the opportunity to address them and elaborate further. Prior to my appearance on October 24th, it had been 6 months since I left the CBSA. I asked for all my emails from the agency related to the allegations. I received a package, and within that package, I found no exchanges with Christian Firth. Subsequently, and in preparation for today, I requested and was given access to a broader search, which is when I found emails where either I or Mr. Firth were on the distribution list, and I'm providing them today. Given how complicated it is to access emails in a department you no longer work in, I will direct any further requests of this nature to the agency. Early pandemic, FAC contacted CBSA to see if we could build an app to replace a paper form. We had days to pull this proposal, and weeks to launch the first version. I asked my team to explore options. Mr. McDonald took lead. Within 48 hours, his team and he did a very quick assessment of options that were narrowed down to 2 broad technical approaches. One option was an entirely outsourced solution developed and hosted by Deloitte. The other option involved a combination of public servants and staff augmentation to leverage the existing code, expertise, and our cloud infrastructure. Let me be clear. At no time was the choice presented to me as being between a Deloitte solution and a GC Strategy solution. As was pointed out numerous times, GC Strategies is a staffing agency who provide rapid access to IT professionals. They do not develop solutions. I am submitting to the committee the proposal and emails I found around the time of these events. You will note that nowhere in either option presented or their associated emails is GC Strategies ever mentioned, nor do I have any recollection of it being raised. The decision I was asked to make was whether to fully outsource the work or to have my team oversee the application development. I had concerns with the fully outsourced solution, handing off full control of a time-sensitive project exclusively to an outside firm, and the fact that our data would be hosted on their IT infrastructure instead of our CBSA cloud. I wanted my team to retain the ability to direct the development and resources. In making this decision, I did not choose or direct the selection of GC Strategies. I chose a strategic direction that met our urgent needs for speed and agility at the time. Importantly, I also did not contact GC Strategies to solicit a proposal. As the CIO, I ruled out the entirely outsourced approach. I stand behind that decision, and I am fully accountable for that decision. I particularly want to address the serious accusation that Mr. McDonald made that I threatened him during our call. I never threatened him. CBSA was preparing to testify, and nobody knew who initially brought GC Strategies in on Arrivescam. I called Ms. McDonald, who I trusted, to answer this question. During the call, it remained unclear who brought GC Strategies into Arrivescam, but we agreed it was not me, and I remember indicating to him that if pressed at committee, I may have to redirect the question to him. To be clear, this was not a threat or intended to be one. It is fact. This committee will call further witnesses as required, and if coming to this committee to answer that question was perceived as a threat by Mr. McDonald, that was never my intention. I never said I would blame him, nor did I lay blame at his feet at my appearance 1 year later. I still don't know who initially contacted GC Strategies to solicit a proposal. I was in no position to threaten his job or career. He was an ADM peer working in a different department. I have a note written by Mr. McDonald a day after the call, published on the Globe and Mail on October 4th, stating that I, that is to say me, was not personally familiar with the GC Strategies company, and that the decision to select this vendor was not made by myself, that is to say me. That written statement by Ms. McDonald is also consistent with what appears to be Botler's report that the committee quoted on November 7th. I don't have the report, but I heard of allegations that there were, quote, conscious efforts to isolate and control the flow and narrative of information to the Vice President, and that, quote, Vice President Dwan doesn't know that we've been communicating back and forth. The past few weeks have deeply affected my professional and personal life, my family, my children, my friends, and my mental and physical health. Today, I will openly answer all questions related to the study, but on the advice of legal counsel, I will not answer unrelated questions about my career or my personal life. Enough harm has been done.
Thank you, Mr. Doan. Mr. Brock, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Doan, for your attendance today and your opening statement. There is, it would be prudent for me, sir, to remind you of a couple of things. I specifically asked that you be sworn for a reason. Even though when witnesses attend at committee, there is a parliamentary privilege that whether people are sworn in or not, it would still be considered a contempt of Parliament to mislead the committee by giving a false statement or false evidence, to refuse unless related to cabinet confidences, to answer any questions, or to fail to produce documents that this committee might require someone to produce. That is generally what happens. I specifically asked that you be sworn, given the swirl of accusations that are flowing around from senior government officials as to who retained GC Strategies. So you were sworn because now this attracts criminal code consideration. I understand you have a lawyer, sir, and that would be very prudent for you to do that. But there are provisions in the criminal code that penalize perjury, deliberately giving misleading evidence, which, if founded, if there's a finding of guilt, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, could land a witness in prison for up to 14 years. So you've got both of those issues to contend with. But I say that not to intimidate. I say that not to concern you. I say that not to force you to clam up and consider your instructions from legal counsel. I say that because, sir, I want to give you a safe place in this committee. There were a lot of accusations hurled at you by Mr. Cameron McDonald, and I have some serious reservations regarding his truthfulness with respect to those accusations. So this is your opportunity, Mr. Dwan, to finally set the record straight. So he, on a number of occasions, has accused you that notwithstanding his position as Director General of Innovation, this particular Arrivescam app surely would fall within his mandate as an innovative product. He's accused you of selecting GC strategies. You, on the other hand, sir, when you testified on October the 24th, 2023, not once, but I counted it on 4 different occasions over the course of that 2-hour meeting, questions from numerous members of this committee from all political stripes claimed that you still don't know who ultimately selected GC strategies. And in fact, you even went so far to say you've been trying to find the answer for close to a year. You used references to my team made that decision, but then your team consists of 1,600 employees. That doesn't make sense. Then you narrowed that down to potentially 6 director generals. I narrowed that down to Cameron McDonald, who's largely responsible for innovation. So we have numerous competing theories as to who chose GC strategies. And I can understand. I think Canadians can understand why no one wants to take ownership. This is a 2-person consulting firm that doesn't produce a product, that doesn't operate out of a brick and mortar entity, largely works out of their basement, and has, over the course of a number of years, but in relation to Arrivescam, hit the taxpayer lottery. $9 million for doing nothing other than finding professionals to do the work. It's a pretty good gig. I bet you there are millions of Canadians who would love that opportunity. So I can understand why you and others who've testified don't want to be attached to this particular company who is under police investigation. So I've got about 1.5 minutes, sir. I'm going to have numerous opportunities to question you in the course of 2 hours. But I'm going to give you this opportunity to give me the straight goods. Was Mr. McDonald lying to this committee as he's accused you of?
Thank you for the chair. The question that I was asked at committee and that I answered truthfully was who picked GC strategies. As I said in my opening statement, I chose a direction to in-house. In there, in the material I found, there's no evidence that that decision was tied to a particular company. I stand behind that decision. That decision allowed us to build Arrivescam. That decision allowed us to build over 2.5 years of changes as the pandemic evolved.
Mr. Dwan, stop right there. I got 30 seconds. Please answer the question. Was Mr. McDonald lying to committee on November the 7th, 2023, when he placed the entire responsibility for that decision to hire GC strategies at your lap? Was he lying or was he telling the truth?
Mr. McDonald said that I made the decision. I did make a decision, to be clear. I made a decision on a technical direction. Also in evidence, and as posted on the Globe and Mail, in his own handwriting, he writes, I did not make that decision, nor was I even familiar with the company.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Sousa, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate you being before us, and I recognize the complexity of what's happening, and I want to try to simplify that complexity to some extent. What was your involvement with the Botler contract?
Thank you for the question. CBSA was handling a lot of sexual misconduct. It was in the news. It was an issue that we were all seized with, given how serious it was. We were briefed on a meeting with the executive team that the misconduct was increasing and that we needed a different way to solve this problem. I was the Chief Information Officer at the time. The President turned to me and asked me, is there a different way from a technology perspective, an innovative perspective, to solve this problem or make a difference? Because everything we've done so far wasn't making the difference that was required to stop this. So I turned to Mr. McDonald, again, who was DG of Innovation, and we were looking for innovation. We were looking for something different. We were looking for a different approach, because the traditional approaches around training and awareness weren't sufficient. Mr. McDonald took that and went away and found a company that would be Botler AI, that would use artificial intelligence to help provide a different way for victims or potential victims to have a conversation with this anonymous bot to see if they actually did suffer sexual misconduct. And it gave them a very safe space. I found the solution very promising. A demo was made before me and a number of my director generals, in which I saw a lot of promise in this technology and in this way of achieving a safe space for victims to potentially consult, get guidance, and then decide on what actions they wanted to take. I saw enough promise.
But there was no contract with GC Strategies or Botler with CBSA at that point, or at any point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This was late 2019, and I saw enough promise in their demo, and also I was moved by Mrs. Dutt's personal story around harassment and discrimination and why she created this company, that I recommended that this is worthy to be presented to the President. Unfortunately, in the beginning of March 2020, the pandemic hit, and that meeting was delayed by several months before we were able to get in front of the President and the VP of HR.
So why did it not proceed? It didn't the agreements or the possibility of having a contract with GC Strategies and Botler, albeit through subcontracting with the other two organizations, it didn't proceed because I'm being told conflicting stories. You're saying it was delayed because of the pandemic. Others are saying it didn't happen because they didn't fulfill the requirements necessary to do the work.
Merci pour la question, Monsieur le Président. Fin de 2019.
Thank you very much for the question. I saw that there was a lot of potential late 2019, but I was afraid of approving a pilot project, so I said to myself, let's broach the VP of Human Resources and the President and see if there's any interest in it. That occurred far later in 2020, and once it was approved, well, we used an existing contract with Dalian and Corodex to start the work with Botler. Based on what I heard recently in committee proceedings, and I wasn't aware of this at the time, Dalian subcontracted out to GC Strategies, and thereafter, and potentially, and I don't know how GC Strategies would have subcontracted out to Botler, but in any event, we don't know how that occurred exactly.
Has the RCMP contacted you in regards to allegations made by Botler?
Thank you for the question. No, they have not.
Was Botler at all involved with Arrivescam?
No, they were not.
Is the RCMP investigating the Arrivescam contracts?
Thank you for the question. Not to my knowledge.
And so Arrivescam discussions and the appointment of GC Strategies has nothing to do with the issues regarding Botler and their pilot research AI project. Is that correct?
That is correct. The two are entirely different things. One is potentially to see if we can find a different way to address sexual misconduct, and the other one was an application to handle COVID.
Mr. Dunn, is it normal to use contractors to assemble potential skills and individual firms and others to provide for the work?
Absolutely. We have very skilled public servants, but sometimes depending on urgency, type of skill, emerging skill like cybersecurity or AI, we don't have the skills in-house or it will take too much time to train. So it's normal to look at staff augmentation and other vehicles to find those skills and those hard skills to help complement, especially in urgent times, and something like the pandemic, I think would qualify as extremely urgent.
However, is it normal for a subcontractor like Botler to engage in work without a contract, without an understanding of what they were supposed to do?
In terms of Botler, how that contracting and subcontracting would occur, unfortunately, in my understanding of this, would have to be confirmed with colleagues at PSPC. So the agency deals with the main contractor. Who they subcontract out to, how many times they do that, that is not something that we know. That is something that only PSPC, the contracting authority, would know.
Thank you,
Yeah,
gentlemen.
Botler had,
That is our time.
sorry, Chair.
Mr.
Oh,
Garon.
thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Garon, go ahead, please. And welcome back.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. Mr. Dwan, in your appearance on the 24th of October, you confirmed that you did not take part in the decision-making process to give GC Strategies a contract, and you said that it was a committee that took that decision. A committee comprised of how many individuals, please? Well, thank you very much for the question. Just to clarify, and as I said in my opening remarks, I made a technical and strategic decision which led to GC Strategies. I'm accountable for that decision. I'm responsible for that decision. Now, you'll see in the documents before you that there are many folks who work day and night over a period of 3 days to bring to the table a proposal to head in one direction or another. How many people, my question is, sir, you referred to a committee. How many people sat on that committee? I don't know. That's my main question. Were there 2, were there 3, or 250,000? I don't recall. I apologise. I'm sorry if I used the word committee. From a governance standpoint, I want to be quite clear here. As you'll see in the documentation, these decisions took place over the course of 1 or 2 days. Question, you took a strategic decision that led to the awarding of this contract that was highly controversial, and you don't know what process led to the awarding of this $9 million contract and how many people were involved. That's tough to believe. You'll see in the documentation that I've submitted, the initial application was in March 2022. 2 days later, there were already 2 options on the table. And then within 1 or 2 days, we had to take a strategic decision as to which direction to take. So you took a strategic direction that you acknowledge you're responsible for. That's a big step. That was taken by a group of individuals, and you're responsible for a decision taken by a group of individuals, but you don't know who they were exactly, and how many of them there were, and how that decision took place exactly. So you have a funny definition of accountability. You'll forgive me for saying that. You'll see in the evidence that all those who are involved in developing proposals with a view to arriving at a technological solution, well, those individuals are listed. I am responsible for the strategic decision that I took, and I stand by that. How many technology experts are there at the CBSA, approximately? Well, when I was vice president, there was between 1,200 and 1,400. So you're looking for a needle in a haystack here. You're saying that you're responsible for a decision that was taken by one of 1,200, 1,400 people at the CBSA. And as parliamentarians, we're to go looking for that needle in the haystack. No, I'm not saying that. You'll see in the evidence that the main individuals who are responsible for researching and developing the decisions, we know who they are, we know their names, we have their email addresses and contact details. Could you please table the names of those individuals before the committee, please, sir? Yes, absolutely. It's in the binder that I have submitted or will submit. Please do so. That brings me to another question, a substantial question. Within CBSA, there seems to be a whole army of individuals who are IT experts, who are highly qualified when it comes to these kinds of matters. Do you think that it's normal? I'm asking for your opinion here. Do you think that it's normal that one should have to deal with an outside firm to select an individual or individuals who would execute a contract, there seems to be an army of people who are specialists in the field within the CBSA. Don't you find that abnormal? If you were to be in our shoes, don't you think that that looks like it would be more intelligent and smart and effective and transparent to act otherwise?
I have a bachelor's degree in computer science. I've been doing this a very long time. The idea for an application started on March 22nd. We launched the first version of Arrivescam April 29th. That is incredibly fast by private sector standards. It was secure, it was on multiple platforms, and it was successful, and it kept iterating. Even using any public service, that nobody can do it that quickly. And this required skills that we did not have at the time.
Monsieur Dwan, je vous parle.
So I'm talking about the selection process here, not the way the app was programmed and how it was rolled out. Is it normal that in an agency that has hundreds of specialists that you would outsource that, and obviously they lined their pockets and they weren't even qualified to make those profitable decisions as to who would actually deliver the product? I'm talking about the middleman here. Do you think that that is normal? Yes, it's absolutely normal. If we had to go and look after all the individuals, whether it be in terms of cybersecurity or the cloud, it would be impossible to do that job, and we did it in a time frame of 6 weeks. So we use a middleman, they have the solutions, they'll do the screening, they have the CVs. If we had to do that ourselves, it would have taken between 6 and 8 months, and maybe that wouldn't have even been feasible. We need someone to point us in the right direction in short order. Had you had to make that decision, do you think that you would have awarded that contract to GC Strategies after all? Well, the buck stops with GC Strategy. I'm responsible for my decision, and I don't regret my decision in the first place.
Thank you, gentlemen. That is our time. Mr. Johns, 6 minutes, please.
Mr. Dwan, I want to offer you an opportunity to clear your name. A government official has come to this committee and directly accused you of lying and threatening them. Other witnesses have indirectly accused you of lying or omission. Your name, as you even stated yourself, is all over the press. I'm sure your many years of work in the public service is important to you. So I want to offer you one more chance to tell the whole truth to this committee. And I'll offer you a chance to address the allegations made against you. But first, can you please address any statements you've made to this committee that you've reflected on and realized you misrepresented something or left something out, however small, however unintentional? I want to offer you a chance to address the allegations made against you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. So, as I understand it, there are 3 allegations. The first one is I misled committee. I did not. When I answered about the emails, when I looked through the package that was received, I searched everything. I found nothing. For me, lying is knowing the truth and deliberately saying something else. The other allegation is that I picked GC Strategies. As you've heard many, many times already, I picked a technical direction. Nowhere in all the material that I've found or my recollection was that direction implied that it would be GC Strategies. So that is the other allegation. In terms of harassing and threatening, I've said in my opening statement, I welcome the opportunity to say it again. I was in no position to threaten Mr. McDonald.
So you're saying that Mr. McDonald was lying to this committee, that when he said that you selected GC Strategies?
Mr. McDonald's interpretation I can't speak to. I did decide a certain direction that I ended up with them. And depending on how you see this, that could be seen as I implicitly decided on a company. I was explaining this to a neighbor of mine. And in the simplest terms for me was, I asked you, would you like to go to Europe or South America? You respond, Europe. And I say, well, you decided Paris. So that is, if that's the view of the reality, my decision at the time, I did not know that GC Strategies was involved in that strategic direction.
Okay, well, Mr. McDonald says he had never heard of Botler until November 19th, 2019, when he was approached with an unsolicited proposal. But we know from recorded conversations that Mr. Firth had been communicating with Botler long before that, telling them that it was McDonald who discovered Botler and wanted their software to solve CBSA C65 needs. When were you aware Firth was communicating with Botler on McDonald's behalf? Were you aware at the time or after the fact?
I only learned these things recently in the news and in the allegations. I do have, in terms of material here, from Mr. McDonald that says at least twice, I found Botler.
Okay, did the CBSA president task you, McDonald, or anyone else with filling the CBSA's need in response to C-65? What was the president's initiative on this?
Thank you for the question. We were being briefed at executive committee about the problems around sexual harassment. Every vice president would have been there, the deputy and the associate deputy. At the meeting, or perhaps thereafter, my memory is not clear, the president looked to me as chief information officer and says, is there a different way using technology to solve this problem? To which I said, I will look into it.
So Mr. Dwan, the CBSA has now suspended all contracts with GC Strategies, Dwan and Cortex. And my understanding is that they're still allowed to do business with other departments within government. And now you're the CTO. Do you not see a problem with this, that CBSA is not doing business with them right now, suspended all activities, and the RCMP are investigating, but yet they can still get contracts within government? It sounds absurd to me.
Merci pour la question. La décision de...
Thank you for the question. The decision to suspend based on the allegations, well, I'm not fully aware.
What led to that decision, or is not informed?
But wouldn't this concern you as the CTO, that you should be looking at this and making a decision whether to recommend a government to suspend them from all government departments until this investigation is thoroughly looked at and the police have done their investigation?
As Chief Technology Officer at Treasury Board, I set technical direction for the government in terms of major IT, things like cloud use, cybersecurity, desktop, others. My role within the Office of the Chief Information Officer is not around procurement. Different deputy heads are delegated to make procurement decisions. From where I sit, I give direction and technology and ensure that the projects and major projects of different departments are aligned to the enterprise standards.
How much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
45 seconds.
Okay, so in your understanding, there is nothing you can do now, given that you know that the CBSA has suspended activities with these companies. There's nothing you can do in your role as CTO.
My role within, I would offer that would be something that PSPC would have a more informed opinion on.
Well, don't they rely on the CTO to give them advice?
Actually, no, they do not.
So the CTO has no input at all if they see a company that is being accused of violations of getting further contracts with the federal government, with the government of Canada.
My role is around the technology direction. It is not from a values and access of companies, different parts of the organization, primarily PSPC.
Regardless of the values.
My
So
role,
the values don't matter.
My role as in terms of Chief Technology Officer is not to be involved in that type of procurement activity. There are different parts of the organization that does that. I set technical direction. I was not consulted on this decision.
Thank you, gentlemen. That is our time. Mr. Genuis, please go ahead.
Mr. Dwan, from what I understand, there were initially 6 companies that were identified that could have built this app. Is that correct? And who were the 6 companies?
Thank you for the question. I'm not aware of who the 6 companies were. I know of the 3 of them. One of them was Apple, the second one was Deloitte, and the other one was a hybrid solution that would use most of our existing coding and technology.
And that so-called hybrid solution was the GC Strategies one?
That ultimately became the GC Strategies one. Yes, it was.
Okay. So, sir, it seems the core point of contention comes down to, well, one of the core points of contention comes down to who chose GC Strategies. $54 million went through this company. It's a 2-person company working out of their basement, no in-house IT expertise whatsoever. Did very well financially off this contract. So everybody wants to know who actually made the choice to hire GC Strategies, and anybody who might have been responsible for that decision is telling us that they weren't involved. You have testified that you did not choose this company. However, you've also testified that you were presented with 2 models of service delivery. One of those, you say, was fully outsourced, and the other one was partially outsourced. And so you made the choice without knowing which company was associated with which bid, you made the choice to choose the partially outsourced as opposed to the fully outsourced solution. Is that your testimony essentially?
I chose a direction, and it was partially outsourced as actually staff augmentation. If I could clarify one part, GC Strategies did not receive $54 million. So I've heard numbers here at 9 million or 11 million. They did not receive that much.
54 million went through, was spent on Arrivescam, went through GC. But I want to just focus on the piece about the decision you made, right? So you were presented with a choice between a fully outsourced option and a partially outsourced option, and you gave the direction, you made the decision to say you want the partially outsourced option. Is that correct?
Made that decision.
Pardon me?
I made the decision to go to a model that would use staff augmentation and our existing cloud and leverage existing code. I made that decision.
You made that decision, and you are telling us that you, at the time you made that decision, had no idea that there were specific companies associated with specific options. Like nobody mentioned that GC Strategies is presenting this option and Deloitte is presenting this option. You made that recommended technology direction in complete ignorance about which companies were behind which option. Is that what you're telling us?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That is not what I'm telling you. I would like to remind the committee that this was not a $54 million in March of 2020.
That's not my question, sir. That's not my question. Answer the question, and you have an obligation to answer the question. That's part of the way this process works.
I am answering the question.
No, you're not. You're telling me that you were not ignorant of which companies were involved. So when you were presented with these two options, a fully outsourced option and a not fully outsourced option, you're telling me you knew at the time that Deloitte was behind one of them and GC Strategies was behind the other?
GC Strategies behind the other, and all the evidence I found will support what I just said.
Pardon me, can you repeat that, please?
I am saying that I was aware that one of them was Deloitte, and I was not aware that the other one's GC Strategies, and all the evidence I found supporting this decision around that time will support what I said. There are no mentions of GC Strategies.
So someone came to you and they said, we have the option of fully outsourcing to Deloitte, or we have the option of a partial outsourcing solution, but we're not going to tell you who the company involved is, and then you made the decision. Is that how it happened? So
about 10 days before this started, the World Health Organization declared a global pandemic.
Sir, not what we're talking about. Not what we're talking about at all. Did you answer my question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an important context. 5 days later, Canada closed its borders. 4 days later, we unprecedentedly closed the borders with the United States.
So you're already accused of lying to this committee. Could you? I think it's in your interest to be forthright and direct, and you have an obligation to be forthright and direct in any event. Is my description of events correct? Namely, that when presented with this choice, you were given either fully outsourced to Deloitte or this partially outsourced solution in which they didn't tell you what the company was involved, and you made the decision in the absence of that information. Is that what you're claiming?
Very quick answer, Mr. Dwan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The decision wasn't partially outsourced. It's staff augmentation, and it was to build an app to replace a form. That was all it was. It was not a $54 million decision. We didn't know that simple app.
So you're not answering my question.
That is our time, gentlemen.
Mr. Chair, I would ask you to call the witness to order on this point. He has an obligation to answer.
Yeah, but that is our time. Perhaps on your next round we can get to that. Thanks very much. Mr. Jouari, please, for 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, thank you for coming today. Mr. Dwan, you were presented with an option of fully outsourced and as opposed to staff augmentation using existing cloud and existing code. Can you explain the existing code piece that you're talking about?
Thank you for the question. CBSA at the time had already an application called eDec, which is short for e-declaration. So we had some basic understanding of mobile development. Now, I won't pretend e-declaration was anything near Arrivescam in terms of complexity. And part of the work that we were doing on innovation, following a direction from Treasury Board, which is to start experimenting with cloud and do more things on cloud, given the different benefits and security that it brings. So
Thank you. So, existing code based on something you had, and I think that's the one that costs about $80,000 to start with. Am I?
version of Arrivescam to replace a simple paper form, yes, it costs $80,000.
Then subsequently about 6.9 to be able to implement all the 70 changes that came over the 2-year period.
In terms of, so this is where it becomes the 54, but that 54 million is misleading. Only a part of that number, to your point, was actually application development.
Okay. Now I want to go back and talk about your knowledge of the suppliers or who would provide those services, whether it would be Apple or Deloitte as part of an outsource approach, or whether it would be a combination of an outsource, as you call it, under the staff augmentation. Where did the name Deloitte come?
Deloitte was contacted by, to my understanding, Mr. McDonald, to very quickly come up with a quick proposal. And when I say quick, it was about 24 hours. The pandemic was there. We needed a solution quickly. So there was a proposal there. The proposal, I've also included in the material, is very, very rudimentary. It's basically mock-ups of what the screen could look like and then where it could eventually go.
So Deloitte was asked, and your claim is by Mr. McDonald to put within 24 hours, put a proposal.
I don't know who contacted who first. At that time as CIO, I was getting approached by every single vendor, many of them, IBM, Accenture, others, to offer to help and deal with this global pandemic. So did Deloitte reach out to Mr. McDonald? Mr. McDonald reached out to Deloitte. This was happening so fast, I'm not sure anybody knows for sure.
There's a claim that you told Mr. McDonald that go with G strategy as Deloitte is in penalty box due to a very large project being off track. Is this a true statement?
As I've said many times, I picked a direction. I did not pick GC strategies. I did not name them. I did not ask them for a proposal. In terms of Deloitte being in the penalty box, my decision on this was not about what they're doing with us on a different project. My concern was this. It was fully outsourced to a third party, and sensitive data wouldn't be on our cloud, it would be on their cloud. So the decision is the lack of flexibility, the lack of agility, which is why I preferred staff augmentation instead of a fully outsourced solution on something so mission critical.
So it is fair to say, and I'm trying to infer, is it fair to say that at no point you made any reference to Mr. McDonald directly or indirectly about not extending the contract to Deloitte or don't go with outsourced solution with Deloitte as Deloitte is in the penalty box for something? So that conversation never took place in your mind.
I don't recall using the term penalty box. I don't watch a lot of sports. That's not a term that would be very familiar with me. So in terms of extending the contract that we have with Deloitte, that would be another project that was led by another vice president. I would not have that decision.
I would take it that no, you did not have that conversation with Mr. McDonald specifically talking about penalty box and all of. Okay, how often did you meet with Mr. McDonald on Arrivescam?
In the early days, and you will see evidence of this, and when I say early days, I do mean days. It starts on the 22nd. You'll see emails on the 23rd. Emails start at 7 in the morning, and it ended at 11, and would start at 7 in the morning again. We would talk all the time.
Talk to Mr. McDonald.
I'm afraid. Mr. Garand, for 2.5 minutes, please.
Donc, Monsieur Don.
So, Mr. Don, if I've understood correctly, you were the Chief Information Officer. You got up in the morning and you said, well, we need an application here. You made a decision and you said that it would be a hybrid solution rather than a fully outsourced solution. And as CIO, you made that decision and then it went out of your office to procurement. They never got back in touch with you. There was no feedback whatsoever, and then that company was selected, and you basically learned it in the newspapers. That's basically our take on the matter. So what you're saying to us is even though, well, you are responsible overall for procurement, but as CIO, your opinion is never solicited when it comes to the companies that are either fit or not fit to respect the terms of a contract. Response. Well, to be clear, I didn't learn that we would be working with GC strategies on the news. That's the first thing. My question is about procurement, sir. You take a strategic decision that leaves your office, and as CIO, you never hear about that decision. It's contracted out, and the buck stops with procurement. It's no longer your problem. But circumstantially, at least, it would suggest that Mr. MacDonald was aware. Given your position, you don't seem to have that much power based on what you're saying. Well, the management under my purview have delegated to, and they're all accountable to me. Mr. Don, you've said since the start of proceedings that the circumstances were exceptional, that you had to proceed rapidly, that they were not normal circumstances, and then you justify what occurred thereafter by referring to those circumstances. But, you know, these were extraordinary circumstances, but this is not appropriate. The first version cost over $80 million, or $80,000 rather. I shouldn't have to be consulted about something that would be developed in a 4-week time frame that cost $80,000.
Faisait confiance à M. MacDonald. Il y avait des délégats.
I trusted Mr. MacDonald. The authority was delegated to him, and I'd like to remind the committee that Arrivescam was not my only responsibility. It was quite a simple app to replace some paperwork. There were many of my employees that had COVID, that were in hospital, so I had to delegate this, and yet I was accountable.
Our time. Mr. Johns for 2.5 minutes, please.
So Mr. Doan, are you saying because you don't follow sports, you don't know what it means when a company's put in the penalty box?
Thank you for the question. Non, c'est pas ça que j'ai dit. J'ai dit, je suis.
That's not what I said. It's not an expression that I'm not aware of, but there's a big difference between an expression that I use myself often.
Okay, well, Deloitte it was alluded to that they were in the penalty box. We can come up with whatever we want. Sideline, pushed out, on pause. Why? Why was Deloitte on pause?
The CBSA was in the middle of a major project, and if memory serves, it was over $400 million, but do not quote me on that, but it was in the neighborhood, to give you an idea, a major IT project to modernize its revenue collection. It was a managed service, and it was the system integrator was Deloitte. That major project had a lot of difficulties, and the difficulties around time, scope, cost. Now, to be fair, and with my 25 years of experience, all major projects in IT have difficulties. It doesn't matter which partner it is. It doesn't matter if it's outsourced or insourced. So the difficulties.
So why are they all not in the penalty box? Why is everybody else not in the penalty box? Why was Deloitte specifically in the penalty box?
For the question, again, I don't remember using the word penalty box. We were working with them on a major project. And from a major project perspective.
A $400 million project, you think you would have a really good idea what they were doing wrong. I mean, why were the cost overruns? Why was it taking too long? I mean, why? If you're punishing them, they've done something wrong. What did they do wrong?
I don't know who punished who. No, there was no punishment involved. These major projects, the problems are joint. In terms of, it could be around business requirements, it could be around changing scope, it could be because it's taken some time, the technology has evolved. So it's not necessarily one party, and usually in my experience, it's both parties that need to sort through it, negotiate it, and make change requests as well. So I don't know.
Typically, you don't punish or put a company in the penalty box, especially a company that size on a project that size, without something going on. I mean, this is really a big problem for this committee. We can't get straight answers from anyone, it seems, on the questions we're asking. And I'm just trying to get to the bottom of this, just some straight goods. Can you tell me anything that this committee should be aware of why Deloitte was in the penalty box or pushed out or whatever you want to come up with?
I'm afraid that is our time, but perhaps we can get back to it on your next round, Mr. Johns. Mr. Duncan, please, for 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Doan, at the beginning of my comments here, I just want to remind you of the swearing in and oath you took here this afternoon. And a witness who refuses to answer questions or fails to reply truthfully may give rise to a charge of contempt of the House. In many rounds now, we've been asking some basic questions and not getting answers. We've been getting skating around it. So I'm going to try again, building on what Mr. Jennis had said earlier. The word you're using very specifically is you picked a technical direction, but Mr. Jennis did ask you in a previous round, when you made the decision to go in-house with a hybrid model, can you confirm again that you were completely unaware in that hybrid model who those outsourced contracts may be? Yes or no? Did you know that GC Strategies or anyone was involved at that time?
Merci pour la question. Le témoignage puis
Thank you for the question. The evidence supports what I said. In no case did the hybrid option mention GC Strategies. Not at all. In no single document, in no single email is the word GC Strategies mentioned.
To go with a in-house model, a hybrid blend as you call it, and picked a technical decision, and you had no clue who would actually be working on the project. You're telling Canadians this is the case that you made a decision worth tens of millions of dollars worth of sole source contracts that came down, and you just said, we'll do it in-house and doesn't matter who the outside contractors are. That wasn't even a thought for you in making a decision one way or the other that you might want to know who it is?
Thank you for the question. I've said it previously, but I will repeat. It was not a multi-million-dollar decision. It was not a $54 million decision. It was a decision to have one application up in 6 weeks to replace a piece of paper that cost $80,000. So I trusted my DGs who are delegated to do these things to get it done, and Mr. McDonald got it done.
Well, I would say your decisions led to 4 sole source contracts going between April 2020 and May 2022, valued at $43.1 million. So I would argue your decisions did have some consequence. So I want to provide you the opportunity as well. You've been to the committee, and there's been many challenges with some of the testimony of what we've heard, to say the least. Many accusations have been made against you regarding you being the one that made the decision and aware of what was going on. But your wording today has picked a technical direction, and you reference other people on your team are the ones that made the final decision to go with GC Strategies, among others, and no names have been given. I want to provide you an opportunity again. If it wasn't you that made the decision, then name the name of who did it.
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. I was the one who made the final decision. I'm responsible for it. The buck stops with me. The question that you're asking me is who contacted GC Strategies to ask them to solicit bids. There's a difference between those two things. Who made the call? I don't know. I still don't know. But based on what I've understood, this is under investigation by CBSA currently.
I go back again. So if it was not you, you've not gone through any of your research, any of the documents that you've asked and been given to. Everyone's pointing the fingers at you to say you're the one that made the decision. Your quote's only a technical direction, yet nobody in all the testimony that we're hearing this way is taking responsibility for what happened. So perhaps what I can just say is, who's going to take responsibility here? Do you take any responsibility for what happened here? You haven't provided the person through all the documentation notes you've been given and going through. You haven't pinpointed how tens of millions of dollars of sole source contracts got awarded over multiple years. And that whole starting point, just say, oh, I'm not sure who it was and it doesn't really matter to you. If it wasn't you, do you accept responsibility? And if not, who?
As the CIO, I take full responsibility on that decision to go in that direction. And that decision allowed us to deliver Arrivescam over 2.5 years. You mentioned it was a multi-million-dollar decision. It was not. We, at the time, did not know the pandemic would evolve the way it did. All the messages were, it will be over soon. We didn't know variants were coming. We didn't know vaccine certificates were coming. We didn't know about exempt travelers and everything that Arrivescam had to do. I made a decision. I stand behind it. It cost $54 million and it was value for money. And as far as I'm concerned, it saved lives.
I think there's a lot of Canadians that would struggle to understand how at the beginning of all of this here, making a decision to go in-house and have a hybrid of having an outsourced blend and have multiple companies, so you just made a selection and just didn't happen to ask at any point whether to go outsource or to go in-house with the hybrid model of having consultants and other firms getting sole source contracts, and never bothered to cross your mind in making one recommendation or the other who might be the partners playing and delivering on things. I think Canadians are going to have a very difficult time believing that.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Mr. Baines, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and once again, thank you, Mr. Doan, for joining us today. Just back to the Deloitte piece. They were screened out of the process, and was it related to the firm's performance on CARM?
Thank you for the question. As point of clarity, there is no process. The decisions here in the material C, we got a request from FAC on the 22nd. Options were already developed in about 48 hours, and we had to make a decision about 24 hours. This was not a process.
Mr. McDonald said it was because of CARM. Was that true? Was that a true statement? The program that was being worked on by Deloitte.
The concern I had wasn't what they were doing with CARM, and that was being led by another vice president. A major project like that will have difficulties over years, and it's been years, and they're still working at the CBSA on CARM. So the decision.
So it wasn't their performance on CARM, as Mr. McDonald said.
My concern was a fully outsourced solution. That's something that we would need in 6 weeks. There is no way with an outsourced solution like that, with all the moving parts, we would have had the version that we had out that quickly. Also, my concern was.
So I'm just going to stop you there for a second. Why are we here? So we move forward with the hybrid model. You made that decision, and you said that was your decision. In the end, you stand beside that decision, behind that decision. But now we're here because there is a contract dispute between GC and Botler. Is that true? Is that why we're here?
Thank you for the question. Je crois qu'on est ici à cause des allégations qui étaient.
I think we're here because of allegations that were made by Botler. That's the crux of the matter. We've discussed this before. Why did it cost $54 million? Why did we deal with a company that's relatively small? We followed the rules.
Procurement. No rules were broken as far as I'm concerned, and the allegations I'm not part of, I'm not investigating. So right now, the decision and the concern I had around the Deloitte solution was the information wouldn't be on our cloud, and I have documentation here that also attests that our cloud is secure, and it would give us the nimbleness and agility to proceed.
Okay, so further to going into Botler's claims, they maintain that it's retaliation. We've also heard that their work was inadequate, or there was a lack of resources to commit to the project. And this is their work on the CBSA app that was canceled. Do you have any knowledge of that? What's your thoughts on that?
I've heard the various testimonies. Now, in terms of this particular project, to be clear, this was something that another company was doing. We were not the IT developers here. We were not the IT delivery. The client was human resources, given the nature of it. So my understanding was 2 of the 6 deliverables were delivered, and for reasons mostly from what I recollect of how busy everybody was within HR and labor relations with the pandemic, there was not enough time to dedicate to this pilot. Now, the specifics of that and that decision, I would refer you back to CBSA.
Okay, so to your knowledge, like, have there been any changes at CBSA and across government in recent years to change practices, like around subcontracting?
I believe I heard that CBSA have done a lot of changes. I'm no longer there around how procurement occurs, how procurement is governed, learning from some of the lessons that we did for things like Arrivescam and others. So I believe those are underway. I would refer you to the CBSA for that. In terms of changes to subcontracting, PSPC colleagues were here to speak to that. I do believe the OAG and the Office of the Procurement Ombudsman are doing various reviews, and if they do find gaps to how to improve that, I sincerely believe that my PSPC colleagues will take those into consideration and take the necessary actions.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Mr. McDonald said you specifically instructed him to help Botler deliver an executive appropriate presentation. So you almost, is that like coaching somebody to deliver an appropriate presentation? Is this the case?
Thank you for the question. Botler is a relatively young, new company that didn't necessarily know how to approach government. So, no, the answer to your question is not no. But if we're going to bring this presentation that I saw, which was very, very technical and probably too long, to a deputy minister, I said this needs to be more succinct and it needs to be more pointed in terms of what are the business problems that are trying to be solved and what are the outcomes. But we're not
Is that
telling
regular practice? Is that regular practice?
Absolutely. If we're going to a deputy minister, if I get a presentation at my level that's 2 hours, I will tell them you have 30 minutes, and you probably want to get your point across in 15 to allow the deputy to ask and answer questions. But that's not shaping the story.
Thanks,
or the
Mr.
proposal.
Doan. That is your time. Mr. Brock, go ahead, please.
So, Mr. Doan, I'm going to go back to my opening line of questioning to you because I asked you on 2, possibly 3 occasions, and you didn't give me a straight answer. And my colleague, Mr. Duncan, reminded you about a refusal to answer questions. I'm not interested in your version of a particular question I put to you. I expect a direct response to a direct question. So you identified a number of areas that Mr. McDonald has accused you of lying. And I'm asking now this very simple question, now a third, possibly a fourth time. Was Mr. McDonald lying at committee when he said the decision to retain GC Strategies on the Arrivescam was yours and yours alone? That is a yes or a no, Mr. Doan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That is not a yes or no question.
I'm asking for a yes or no, Mr. Doan.
Thank you, but that is not a yes or no question. I made a technical direction in terms of where to go. That
Again,
led to
Mr.
GC
Doan,
strategy.
I'm not interested in your explanation. Why is it impossible for you? It was easy for Mr. McDonald to accuse you of deliberately lying. Is this something that your lawyer has instructed you not to opine on or to comment? I'm asking you specifically, was Mr. McDonald being truthful with respect to all the lies that he claims that you made when you testified, specifically that it was your decision to retain GC Strategies? It's a yes or a no. Are you incapable of answering a yes or a no?
I am under oath. So the words that come out of my mouth are going to be very, very specific because I am under oath. The question that was asked of me is who picked GC Strategies? I did not make the decision to go with GC Strategies. I picked a direction.
I'm going to stop you right there. You did not make the decision to go with GC Strategies. Mr. McDonald claims that you did. So is he telling the truth or is he lying?
Thank you for the question. If his interpretation of that question is who picked the technical direction that led to it, then that is his interpretation.
He didn't use the words technical direction, and I'm glad you brought up technical direction because why was it impossible for you to phrase how you were involved with GC Strategies when you last testified before a committee? You went through all these mental gymnastics to try to make us believe, well, it wasn't my decision alone. It was my team. I had 1,600 employees. No one believes you, Mr. Doan. I wanted to give you a safe environment to finally come clean with the truth. And it appears you are incapable of doing it. Someone has to accept responsibility for giving $9 million taxpayer dollars to GC Strategies on the Arrivescam app. That is fact. That is reality. Mr. Firth from GC Strategies confirmed that. I'm asking you, are you accepting responsibility for that, or is Mr. McDonald lying?
As I said many times, I take full responsibility for the technical direction that I took that led to GC Strategies.
I'm going to accept that as a yes. So he was telling the truth that that decision was yours. It wasn't his. Now, he gave you he looked at 6 options before he presented Deloitte and GC Strategies. How incompetent can you be, sir, when you're unable to identify for committee the names of those 4 other companies? Why is that?
You will see in the evidence, this happened over 24 hours. So lots of things were.
1 hour. You're the chief technology officer. Why can't you identify the other 4 companies? We know Deloitte. We know they're in the penalty box. We know it's GC Strategies. Who are the other 4?
I was not involved in that period of time, at that level of time. I trusted Mr. McDonald to do the work and do the assessment over a 24, 48-hour period of time.
Mr. Doan.
I was managing closing the border.
I'll stop you right there. Did it not raise red flags to you that he presents only 2 companies in all of Canada that are actually capable of doing delivery on this Arrivescam app? We know that Deloitte was out of the question. Mr. McDonald knew that Deloitte was in the penalty box, didn't he? That was widely known at the CBSA.
Thank you for the question. He did not present 2 companies. He presented an option, and the other one was to outsource. He did not, at any point in time.
Sir, he claims that Deloitte was his preferred choice. Was he telling the truth or was he lying?
I have found no evidence of that. And actually, I have emails that would recommend using our cloud, using e-declaration for Mr. McDonald.
I'll ask the question. He claims he presents to you 2 options, Deloitte and GC Strategies. And he says to you, as he testified at committee, that his preferred choice was Deloitte, and then you turn that down because you probably confirmed that Deloitte was in the penalty box, and you directed him to go with GC Strategies. Again, Mr. Doan, for the 5th, 6th, 7th time, who is lying? Are you misleading, or was Mr. McDonald misleading when he said that decision, that direction was not his, but yours and yours alone?
Very brief answer, please.
There's an evaluation matrix in here developed by the CBSA that supports my decision and does not recommend the Deloitte approach. That was.
Thank you, Mr. Dillon. Mr. Shawari, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Doan, was there at any time any concern raised by your superior about Arrivescam?
I'm not clear on what the concerns that you're alluding to.
Any concern about the cost, about the timeline, about responsiveness at any time? Any of your superiors who raised any concern?
No, not at all. We were having different releases pretty much every 30 days, responding to moving OICs and public health measures that are evolving every day, new variants, vaccine certificates, different types of workers. We were working around the clock, and we were delivering over and over and over a 2.5-year period.
Thank you. Mr. McDonald, I recall Mr. McDonald indicated that you had indicated that the superior or people above are not happy about Arrivescam. Can you recall any conversation that you may have had with Mr. McDonald around your superior not being happy about Arrivescam?
Thank you for the question. No, on.
No, not at all. There were meetings held, there were committees struck, there were town hall meetings, deputy ministers, other deputy ministers congratulated us on the job we're doing. They knew that what we were doing over the extended period, the stress that people experienced, we were proud of what we did, as were our superiors throughout the entire length of the pandemic.
Thank you. Mr. McDonald also claimed that he understood that you said somebody is not happy up there and they want a head, somebody's head. Do you recall any conversation you had with Mr. McDonald around an individual as superior, whether the president of CBSA or anybody else, that not happy about and they want somebody's head?
Thank you for the question. I was not briefing the minister or the minister's office about this at this time or in the fall of last year. Nobody was looking for a proverbial head. The question that was raised last year was, why did it cost $54 million? Was it value for money? And one of the sub-questions that was making the media was why among the 30 or more companies that we worked with to develop Arrivescam, why would one of the companies be relatively small? There was no allegations of wrongdoing. Nobody's looking for a head.
Yeah, thank you. Who raised that question? Who specifically raised that concern or question?
Nobody raised that question. Nobody raised that concern.
So no minister, not your superior, raised the question that there are these there's media news and we want to get to a bottom of it.
We're still, and I continue to be very proud of the Arrivescam work. Like, GC Strategies was one among 30-something companies that we worked with to deliver this, and it was tireless over 2.5 years.
A concern raised around the $54 million.
There were questions to make sure we could justify it and explain it because it was very popular.
Those questions.
The entire agency, everybody, but we defended those numbers. We defended those numbers.
Okay, so did at any time a minister or a representative of a minister reach out to you or to your department, directly or indirectly, to inquire about the cost of the application?
Not to me.
Okay. So you also do not recall having any conversation about wanting somebody's head, somebody up there wants somebody's head?
As I said last year, there were no allegations of wrongdoing. It was just, can we explain the $54 million, which I believe CBSA did, and I still stand behind it.
So with 30 seconds to go, if there is any allegation of misconduct and lying and intimidation, who would you directly raise that to? Who would be your superior?
Any issues at that time during that period would have been Mr. John Osowski.
And what role does the clerk of the Privy Council play as it relates to raising these concerns of allegation?
At my level, I don't interact directly with the clerk. Any interactions would be higher than me. So in terms of seriousness of allegation, I would raise what I think would be needing attention, and then I trust the deputy ministers would raise to the appropriate authorities after that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Garong for 2.5, please.
Merci, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Mr. Dwan, I'll tell you why I'm really not wanting really to believe you here. First, you said the situation was urgent, that you had to go through procedures that normally take a longer period of time, and you had to do this in a 24-hour to 48-hour time frame because everything was rushed. Now, there are normal procedures that over a period of weeks or months, and this took place over 24 to 48 hours. There were technical specs, there was reports, you delegated, and then there was contracting out. Now, it would strike me that in a time of crisis, when things are moving very quickly, that would be an adequate reason for the Chief Technology Officer to give an opinion and to be consulted on the matter before retaining a company. You're saying that you followed the rules as normal, but this was exceptional, so everything was done within a 24 to 48-hour period, and the subtext of that is that things were not done normally. What version should we be believing here of what you have to say? Thank you very much for the question. There were people dying across Canada. There were Canadians going to hospital. That's not what I'm asking, sir. I'm not asking who went to hospital, who didn't go to hospital. You said in the first instance that things were rushed through, they were rammed through over 48 hours, and that you had to take extraordinary means. And when we ask, were you consulted? You said, well, all the normal procedures were followed. So what you're telling me is that normally the normal procedure is to not consult you if things are to be done in a 24-hour to 48-hour period? Response. The procurement procedures were followed. PSPC was consulted throughout. There was governance concerns, technical considerations. It should have been better documented, but it was a time of crisis and there was a pandemic. So what you're saying is that in a time of crisis, you were the Chief Technology Officer and no one saw fit to consult you and determine which was the best company to retain. You're at you were the top-ranked person and you should have no input into the decision at the end of the day? Response. Given all my responsibilities at the time, the closure of the border, I had to delegate this to my Director General, Mr. MacDonald. I placed my trust in Mr. MacDonald. I managed my entire team at the time. I had to manage the lockdown.
Mr. Grom. Mr. Johns for 2.5, please.
Can you, did GC Strategies and all of its resources who worked on CBSA projects have proper security clearances? Like, have they all received and signed completed security briefing and screening forms?
Thank you for the question. To the best of my knowledge, you cannot actually start work, and a lot of the contracting authority, procurement teams within CBSA would have verified all of those things before work could be started.
Okay, these ghost contractors and unnamed resources pose, as you know, a significant risk to our national security and the data and privacy of all Canadians. Now, Ritika Dutt and Amir Morov never signed an NDA or any other confidentiality agreement with the government, CBSA, or any of the pass-through contractors that were enlisted under. Is this normal practice, and is it permitted by procurement policies for the government to not require contractors and or consultants to sign NDAs?
Thank you for the question. I believe there are two parts to that question in terms of NDAs and subcontracting. The first part is the term ghost contracting. I must admit, in all my years, 25 years, that's not a term I'm familiar with, and it's not a term I've heard of in terms of ghost contracting. So if what you're referring to is subcontracting, the practice of subcontracting, I believe that has been explained many times. The Government of Canada deals with the contractor in question, the main contractor. The main contractor then has, following PSPC guidelines and rules, the ability to subcontract to whoever they need to get the work done. Those subcontractors and those engagements, the Crown of the government, in this case CBSA, are not privy to that. And the only one who would know that and could probably speak to your question would be PSPC.
Okay, so basically the subcontractors don't need to sign NDAs is what you're saying. And they can have access to private information and, you know, data and privacy of Canadians without signing an NDA or any other confidentiality agreement. That's basically what you're saying.
Merci pour la question. Non, ce n'est pas ce que j'ai dit.
No, that's not what I said. All the subcontractors that work on a contract have to follow the same rules and meet the same security requirements, regardless what level those subcontractors are at. From a security standpoint, everything must need to be upheld.
Mr. Genuis for 5, please.
Mr. Doan, in general, when did you first become aware of the existence of GC Strategies?
I didn't become aware of the existence of GC Strategies well into the pandemic.
So when?
I would have to go back into my records to confirm.
Okay, but you're saying well after the awarding of this contract?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I am.
Okay. So the time, you're telling us that at the time this contract was awarded, you never heard of GC Strategies, never heard of Christian Firth, never met, had no awareness of them whatsoever.
There are over 30 companies that worked with
that's what you're telling us, right?
Thank you for the question. That is not what I'm telling you.
Hey, can you give me a direct answer, sir? Were you when did you become aware of GC Strategies? You said it was after the awarding of this contract. You said that earlier, right?
Thank you for the question. I believe what I interpreted was, when was I aware that GC Strategies works on Arrivescam? That was well after the pandemic.
No. When were you first aware of GC Strategies in general?
Thank you for the question. When I looked through my records, there was a meeting in 2018 where I was a board member of IT professionals, and they came and presented to that board a very generic set of services and offers that were there. It was a large group setting. I do not have the material still, but I can endeavor to find it.
Do you recall that meeting, though? Do was that the first time you learned about the existence of GC strategies?
I have a meeting invite and notes that they were there presenting among probably others.
Do you recall that meeting?
I do not recall that meeting.
Okay. We know that GC strategies did work for CBSA prior to Arrivescam. When, in your recollection, did you first become aware of the existence of GC strategies?
So, thank you for the question. Other than them being a presenter at a board meeting, then after that, I know that GC strategies was on letterhead when the Botler demo was presented to us.
Okay. Sir, I think everyone on this committee would be familiar with the phrase, make it look like an accident. And that's starting to seem to be what this is sounding like. Nobody is going to admit, apparently, to choosing GC strategies, but all kinds of factors were lined up in such a way that made it seem like it was the only choice. You were at the center of this choice, apparently. You say that you chose between the fully outsourced option, which you knew was from Deloitte, and the staff augmented option, which you say at the time you didn't know who it was coming from. Who brought this choice to you initially? How was it presented to you? This technical choice you tell us about.
Materials here. They're essentially a bunch of emails that says one is we're going to a Deloitte. There's a deck that is presumably from Deloitte with mock-ups and screens. There's a different deck that says this is the in-source option. The material is here. That second option that I talk about, there's no mention of GC strategies anywhere.
Okay, so you were presented with two options. One had Deloitte. One was presented as an in-source option, but it didn't have the name of the company involved. That's really weird, right? Did you think it was weird at the time? Did you say, hey, how come there's no mention of the company or companies involved?
Thank you for the question. These options were developed over 48 hours. There's a very real possibility that at that time, things were moving so quickly, nobody even knew what company would be required or type of staff augmentation. There are many companies out there that do this type of work. So the first is, let's land on a technical direction.
Okay, but you were presented with a fairly detailed deck explaining an in-source option, right?
Thank you for the question. The deck was not fairly detailed. It was developed in 48 hours. It was mostly mock-ups and screens of what the first version that cost $80,000 could potentially look like. You cannot do a fairly detailed deck in 48 hours.
But it had the mock-ups. It had the precise cost in it, and there was a company that was behind it, but that company wasn't presented in the deck. That's what happened, right?
Thank you for the question. There was no precise cost in this. As I said, it was developed in 48 hours. It is basically saying, in what direction do we want to go? Here are early screens of what replacing a paper form can look like. And at that time, I don't believe anybody had an idea.
But you were presented with,
that is our time, I'm afraid, Mr. Denuis. Mr. Sousa, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So let's get a sense here of what is happening. We have a number of contractors that you deal with over many years. How long have you been on your job, Mr. Dwan?
I've been an IT professional for 25 years. In my current role, 6, I was about 5 to 6 years as the Vice President and Chief Information Officer of the CBSA.
Okay, so over that period of time, over decades, has GC Strategies been a supplier to government over those period of time? Do you know?
From what I've learned and what I've seen, they have been providing services for a number of years to various departments.
Over various years, under various administrations of government?
If memory serves, but I don't know exactly, I think they've been in business in the range of 12, 15 years, if not longer, but I don't know for sure.
And how about Deloitte? Do you know how many contracts they have going with the government, thereabouts?
I don't know for sure, but they are a multinational company that provides system integration, professional services, consulting. The number must be very, very high.
Fair. And so you have these two organizations one that's been around many years, dealing with various governments over a number of contracts. Deloitte, an international company, doing great work on a number of contracts. And your decision, from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, you were concerned about the integrity of the cloud and the safety of the information to be more in-house versus on someone else's platform. Is that correct?
I prefer to use our existing resources, our existing cloud, and our existing code. And another factor in there in that decision was speed and agility. As I said, after this week, frankly, the first version was launched in about 5 weeks after that. When we deal with a multinational like that, that is impossible. Multinationals are properly documented. Everything is a change request. Everything is a negotiation. And when you deal with a multinational, by nature of it, it is much slower. There is no way that we would have had a solution in 5 weeks dealing with a multinational like Deloitte.
Fair enough. So we are now, so the issue with Botler, that's a separate issue altogether. GC Strategies didn't have a contract. That's completely different. But now you've gone to Arrivescam. You're in the midst of a pandemic. Things are not normal. As much as you want to be able to proceed in a normal fashion, you're not in a normal state at this point. You're reacting to a lot of incoming, but you're maintaining the integrity that you think is appropriate regarding the procurement process. So explain to us what you mean by making a technical decision versus the procurement itself.
So in the early days, the technical direction was to do staff augmentation, which would require a company to give us access to technical resources fairly quickly. As the pandemic evolved and Arrivescam evolved and got more and more complicated, more companies were involved, and successive contracts were engaged and necessary as well. In my recollection, specifically on GC Strategies, the first 3 contracts were sole sources, and the last contract was a competitive process, which they won.
So you were not aware in the decision that you were making to have more internal control that GC Strategies would be part of that deal. You weren't looking at GC Strategies as a supplier at that point.
Thank you for the question. No, I was not aware that that direction implied, and I'm not sure even 48 hours later that was even a known thing. And in terms of what
as it proceeded, contracts were signed. GC Strategies became a supplier, one of 30, I think you explained. How much GC Strategies? What was their contract? How much were they making? Do you know?
We have the breakdown. Thank you for the question. There's a breakdown in my material of how much each of the contracts were worth. What I understand is ultimately, although I've heard contradicting numbers here, the number that I have in my memory is around $11 million over 4 contracts over several years. And to be clear, the business model, they are not personally making $11 million. Depending on the rates that they charge to the subcontractor, they would make somewhere between $1.5 to $3 million, according to my math, over the span of 4 contracts and over the span of almost 2.5 years.
Because GC Strategies would have solicited and would have gotten a number of other subs or other service providers to do the work. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much, Mr. Souza. We're going to do our final round now. Colleagues, we're couple minutes ahead, so I'm just going to add 1 minute to each of the 6 interventions, starting with Mr. Brock for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to go back, Mr. Doan, to Mr. McDonald's statements last time that he appeared at committee. We talked about a number of lies that he claims that you have made. And now specifically, I want to talk about the alleged threats. In your opening statement, he claims, well, Mr. McDonald claims that he was directly threatened by you on more than one occasion. You claim that that didn't happen, that you did not threaten. So both versions of fact cannot be true at the same time. So I'll ask you again, is your version truthful, and was Mr. McDonald lying to this committee about you threatening him with respect to the exposure of GC Strategies? Yes or no?
Thank you for the question. My version is truthful. I had never threatened Mr. McDonald. I said if we couldn't have come to an answer that the committee may turn to.
I will, by extension, claim that Mr. McDonald was lying to this committee. I know that you have an aversion to using that language, probably as a result of some legal advice, so I'm not going to push you on that, but clearly you claim now, under oath, that your version is actually accurate. Did you actually seek advice from him on your initial upcoming testimony at this particular committee? He claims that you were so nervous, you were emotional, and at times you were crying, and you were desperate to get some guidance from him, even though he had been removed from the CBSA for close to a year at this point. You wanted guidance on how to testify at OGO. Was that correct?
Merci pour la question. Ce que j'ai dit tantôt, c'est que j'ai jamais.
Thank you for the question. What I said is I never threatened Mr. McDonald. I did say that I did not threaten him.
On how to testify at your first committee meeting, yes or no?
J'ai demandé à M. McDonald.
I asked Mr. McDonald, and it's in the material here, I asked him if he could help us clarify some facts considering what had happened at the agency in March 2020. He was closer to what had happened.
I have an actual copy of the email that Mr. McDonald wrote on the 29th of October 2022 at 11:28 in the morning. It was sent directly to you. It was CC to Kelly Belanger. It was CC to Carol Sabarin, to Antonio Utano, and to a Josh Bird. This was the subject matter of the Globe and Mail story that broke on October the 4th, 2023. I'm not going to read to you, sir, the exact 7 pages of the email, but certain excerpts of that. So Mr. McDonald says to you, you asked me for advice on the key question of why GC strategies, but I also think we are all grappling with who selected GC strategies, that he wrote in on the October 29th, 2022 email. So let me stop you right there. So at this point, despite you telling this committee about all of the information that you picked a technical direction, you were prepared, sir, to take the advice of Mr. McDonald to claim ignorance, that you weren't aware as to who directly chose GC strategies, because you said that on 4 occasions in your previous testimony. You said it was part of my team, and you weren't able to identify with clarity that you are today, sir, with respect to the technical direction. So that concerns me. Mr. McDonald's email contains several suggested answers for the executives. As an example, I will start by saying that I was not personally familiar with GC strategies during the time in question, the document states, although it's unclear which executive would be expected to deliver that line. The email also predicts some of the questions they will be asked. If pressed, come on, we want some accountability here. Who decided? How did this company get a contract for almost $9 million? Who made money off of this? Who is getting rich off of taxpayer dollars, the document states, followed by a recommended response. Another question, Mr. Chair, I stand by my statement that I don't believe there was a single person, and I'm not actually aware of any rules being broken or wrongdoing. This is not how we operate at the CBSA. This exchange, this email with coaching on what to say and anticipated questions by committee is so disturbing on so many levels, sir. It's akin to obstructing justice. My former career as a Crown attorney would elicit a police investigation if this type of evidence came out with respect to a trial or a hearing. Parliament is a little different, but it's still disturbing to me, sir, on many, many levels that you sought coaching on specifically what to say and to not accept responsibility for GC strategies. Have you been coached today, sir, on what to say and what not to say?
Thank you for the question. I have not been coached today on what to say. There's an email that documents what I actually requested of Mr. McDonald, and I quote, Leaning particularly on your time in the first year when all of this being stood up and the various moving parts, would appreciate your review, addition, and edits to any of this material in prep for the agency's appearance next week.
Thanks, Mr. Doan. Mr. Sousa, please, for 6.
Mr. Doan, how many contractors were involved with Arrivescam? I think you mentioned 30, is that correct?
Merci pour la question. Si ma mémoire est bonne, mais je vous référerai.
If my recollection is good, it's over 30.
And of those contractors, GC Strategies is one of them. The claims are that GC Strategies is making a cut on the deal and that they don't deserve to make money because they didn't do the actual work. Of the contractors that you assigned, the other 30, are they in this same arrangement?
Thank you for the question. So the work that these types of organizations do is security screening, they do vetting, they connect, they have a network that can give you very, very quick access to the skills you need that would be impossible to get yourself in terms of contracting, finding them, and getting in touch with them. So that's the work that these companies do.
I appreciate that. So the other companies would have taken their cuts too, presumably.
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. Among the 30 companies, a lot of them are offering different things, and it wasn't always staff augmentation. We work with Amazon, for example, for the cloud. We work with Microsoft. There were very specialized companies who would secure mobile apps.
Something companies, CBSA can provide the list of what they are and what they did. Only a number of them would be in the subcontracting business.
So we're trying to assess value for money, and we're also trying to assess in this committee any kind of nefarious activity that may have occurred as a result of the selection of GC Strategies, because there's alleged claims that they are this ghost contractor by Botler. And so I'm just trying to understand the process. My understanding is GC Strategy was a partner of Botler, and they had no contract, but they were trying to promote Botler's opportunities in another venture. And then Arrivescam comes to be. GC Strategy already has a long history of activity with government over many different administrations, has been selected through this hybrid situation that you put forward as an alternative to using Deloitte. And now GC Strategies gets selected, and we're trying to understand how that took place. You've made it clear that the buck stops with you. You take full responsibility for the administration of the Arrivescam app, and you're stating that it took a life of its own to some extent because of the activities throughout the pandemic. Who actually signed the contract with GC Strategies?
Thank you for the question. So there are 4 contracts with GC Strategies. As I said, the first 3 were sole source. The last one is competitive. To my understanding, the CBSA has already provided those contracts, and actually those contracts are actually public knowledge. So you can find those contracts and as well as who signed them.
Did you sign it, Mr. Doan?
Thank you for the question. No, I did not.
Do you feel there was value for money in those contracts?
Yes, I do. We delivered Arrivescam in all its complexity. Without Arrivescam, and it was still using paper, different quotes were named. Mr. McDonald said $3. I'll buy that number. So if you take 30 million successful submissions in Arrivescam and you multiply it, the math, I think, explains itself in terms of 54 million versus paper. Paper, and that's a one-to-one calculation. There are other impacts to using paper. Paper takes time to digitize, in the order of 7 days to digitize. So once a traveler comes in and submits a piece of paper, it would take up to 7 days for that electronic information that's usually error-prone because it's handwritten to get the fact, to do necessary public health measures, to do follow-ups, contract tracing, or to make sure the people are staying home if they need to. So there's the direct cost of replacing paper and all the benefits of having real-time, immediate electronic information. In addition,
Mr. Firth has been alleged to have close relationships with senior members of the bureaucracy and civil servants, referencing conversations with others, with Botler in particular. Have you had a relationship with Mr. Firth prior to this situation?
Thank you for the question. I did not have a relationship with Mr. Firth either prior to it or after it.
Do you know of anybody in government that has been having an ongoing relationship with Mr. Firth?
Thank you for the question. No, I do not.
So when the opportunity presented itself, how is GC Strategies brought forward? Did we seek out suppliers? How does this work?
Thank you for the question. So, as I said a few times, the decision to go in the technical direction that led to GC Strategies is mine, and I'm accountable for it. I still do not know who picked up the phone and asked them to solicit a bid in the first place. And I believe the CBSA is investigating this matter.
Thank you. Do you have anything more you want to add before we wrap up?
Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chair. I think people need to understand, I'm not making this up in terms of what we were living at the time. So March 11th, World Health Organization, global pandemic. 5 days later, government sends most of its employees home. Same time, we close our borders internationally. 4 days later, we closed unprecedentedly the border with the United States. So this is the reality as CIO I was accountable for, and I had to enable both the changes at the border and the changes for employees.
Thanks, Mr. Doan. Mr. Garon for 2.5 minutes, or for 3.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Mr. Doan, if we just recapitulate, you had a technical decision to make. So should we completely subcontract out, or should we have a hybrid model? Is that correct? Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairperson. Yes, you've understood correctly. Now, when you received the report, there was Deloitte that could have provided a fully outsourced solution, and then there was a second option, if I've understood correctly. Thank you for the question. Yes, you've understood correctly. Now, aside from confidentiality considerations, you said to the committee that Deloitte is a big multinational company and that by their very nature, they're problematic and the product might not be delivered quickly. Is that correct? Yes, multinationals, oftentimes, when it comes to huge projects, are a little bit slower. We do talk to companies like Deloitte for apps that cost $80,000, for example. I've understood. So you say that Deloitte was one solution, but that you didn't even know what the other company was. The size of the company plays a role, as you just admitted. So in light of that, why weren't you seeking input or information? If it's so important, even though it's not in the report, how is it that you didn't ask any questions? How is it that the nature of the company is important for option 1, but when it comes to option 2, the size of the company is no longer important? Thank you for the question. Well, the way you formulated the question is there were 2 companies. Well, no, there were 2 options, and you only knew which company was for one option. My question is, why weren't you concerned about the size of the company in the case of the second option? My question was very specific. It's not how you just characterized it, and I'm expecting an answer to that question. Thank you for the question. There was no company associated directly with the second option, and I don't think one necessarily asks about the size of a company.
PSPC. So in our decision making around this, I am not of the habit to ask of the hundreds of companies and vendors how big are each an individual company. I asked for a specific technical direction, and that technical direction at the time, there was no association to any specific company.
La nature, la taille de l'entreprise.
So the size of the company was an issue for the fully outsourced option, but when it comes to the second option, it didn't cross your mind, it wasn't important, it's not your way of doing things when it comes to the second option. You can understand why this strikes us as unusual. And ultimately, the contract was awarded to 2 individuals working from their basement. So my question is, why didn't you ask any questions when that report was issued? You're entitled to ask questions about the nature of the company that would be going after resources. Why didn't you ask any questions? Response. I don't know how many employees work for Deloitte. I know it's a multinational company. So it's not how many employees. Why didn't you ask the question in the case of the second option, i.e. the nature of the company? It strikes me as quite normal. There was no company associated with the second option.
And run Mr. Johns for 3.5, please.
Sorry, so you said, can you tell me again what you think GC Strategies made after costs?
Thank you for the question. I gave you my quick math depending on rates. We are not privy to the rates that these companies charge.
What's the amount you just quoted earlier in this committee that you said that you think that they made on their $11 million contracts with Arrivescam?
Thank you for the question. So watching these appearances, I did hear them say that their typical rates are between 15 and 30%. So I did math of 15 to 30% of $11 million. That is not a factual statement of mine. That is what I heard them say. I do not know what rates they charge, and their rates change depending on which subcontractor they deal with. To my knowledge, to be corrected, only PSPC would know that information. We do not know that information.
But say it's 20% on 11 million. That's a couple $1 million. They've done $55 million with Canada as a whole outside of Arrivescam in total. This is, a $10 million reward for 2 individuals over a couple of years. Do you see anything wrong with that, given that they don't have an office or any staff? You said that, we understand it's value for money, that their job is to do screening, vetting, to connect people. I mean, they altered resumes. They fraudulently changed resumes. That's how the screening went. In terms of vetting, I mean, no one signed any security briefing or screening forms. There was no NDA that was ever signed or a confidentiality agreement. I mean, this sounds like a disaster in terms of value for money. Would you not agree that there should be some changes?
Thank you for the question. The allegations around CV changing, I'm not part of any of those investigations, and I can't speak to that. In terms of the subcontracting model, this exists everywhere. This exists in the private sector, in the construction business or others. So this is a model.
Well, it shouldn't exist in the federal government. So $10 million, do you not believe that you could hire a firm for $10 million or actually employees within the department, $10 million, hire 2 individuals that could do this kind of work?
For Arrivescam, we needed access very quickly, as I've said, to many different types of skills, cybersecurity and others that we didn't necessarily have.
I'm just asking you, do you think you could hire someone with those kind of skills with that kind of money?
The government of Canada is working very actively to increase our IT skills and resources, but we're in very, very hard competition with the private sector who offer much more generous compensation packages for skills like cloud, artificial intelligence, and others. The other reality is it takes a long time to hire somebody from the outside with the government. So a long process.
Not for that kind of money. So Ms. Dutt sent an email, the second email, with allegations of misconduct in December of 2021. Botler's project was terminated the very next day. I have to say the timing of this stinks of reprisal, especially since just a couple weeks earlier, CBSA was telling Botler they were assigning new resources to aid the project. So what changed? Why was Botler's project terminated? And I asked PSPC this question, but they couldn't answer. If you can't, then I'd like CBSA to answer this in writing.
From what I've heard of these committee appearances, there were no allegations in 2021 raised by Botler. Mr. Utano spoke to this. There was a contracting dispute. PSPC was engaged, and the issue was resolved, from what I understand, fairly quickly. The allegations of wrongdoing from Botler surfaced in November of 2022.
Resolved, they were turfed.
That is our time, I'm afraid. Mr. Genuis for 6 minutes, please, and then we'll finish with Mr. Jouari for 6.
During his testimony 1 week ago, Mr. McDonald said the following, quote, I believe Mr. Mendocino was not happy. Mr. Mendocino wasn't there when Arrivescam kicked off and when all of this was going on, but there was a lot of news about Arrivescam. Min was worried that either he or Jonathan Moore were going to get fired. So he was talking about somebody's head on a platter. And he said because Jonathan Moore had made a whole bunch of mistakes from an accounting perspective, talking about how much Arrivescam cost, it would go his way or it could go Mr. Doan's way because Mr. Doan was the CIO at the time. Then he turned. We were on the phone, but he stopped the conversation and he just said, you know, Cam, if I have to, I'm going to tell the committee that it was you. End of quote. Mr. Doan, in that section of his testimony, was Mr. McDonald telling the truth?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. I didn't brief Minister Mendicino on this issue. As I said, last year, there were no allegations.
I'm going to jump in there. I asked you a very simple question, and we've had you for almost 2 hours, and you've struggled to give direct answers to simple questions. And I'm not going to go off this one. In that section of his testimony, was Mr. McDonald being truthful, yes or no?
Thank you for the question. I am under oath, so yes, I am being very careful about my statements because I'm under oath. I understand what.
But you still have an obligation to answer questions before a parliamentary committee. You have an obligation to answer those questions, sir, and not doing so is contempt of Parliament. Again, were Mr. McDonald's statements truthful, yes or no?
Thank you for the question. I am trying to answer the question. So there are different elements of that quote that you read to me that in terms of what is truthful, in terms of what is engaging.
Were some elements of that quote untruthful then?
Last year, nobody was looking.
Are there any
fire
elements
anybody.
of that quote, sir, that are not accurate?
I can get that in writing. Can you repeat the quote for me?
Sir, the quotation, I have limited time, and the quotation was directly from Mr. McDonald's testimony. You heard it. Was
Mr. Generous, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. Please repeat the quote. I will allow the extra time. And Mr. Doan, I'm going to just read from you, right from witnesses, for swearing of witnesses, procedure and practice. It states, refusal to answer questions or failure to reply may result in a charge of contempt. This has been repeated to you several times today. There have been a lot of direct questions, and I normally don't do this, but there have been very specific questions, and we'd like very specific answers. Taxpayers deserve that. Canadians deserve that. Parliament deserves that. Mr. Generous, I'm going to turn it back over to you if you want to repeat the quote, and I will not take away your time.
Thank you, Chair. The quote is as follows. I believe Mr. Mendicino was not happy. Mr. Mendicino wasn't there when Arrivescam kicked off and when all of this was going on, but there was a lot of news about Arrivescam. Min was worried that either he or Jonathan Moore were going to get fired. So he was talking about somebody's head on a platter. And he said because Jonathan Moore had made a whole bunch of mistakes from an accounting perspective, talking about how much Arrivescam cost, it would go his way or it could go Mr. Doan's way because Mr. Doan was the CIO at the time. Then he turned. We were on the phone, but he stopped the conversation and he just said, Cam, if I have to, I'm going to tell the committee that it was you. End of quote. In that section of his testimony, sir, was Mr. McDonald being fully truthful? Yes or no?
Thank you for the question. No.
Which parts of that quotation are not true from your perspective?
So I've written them in order. So the first one, Mendicino not happy. I would not know that. I would not be privy to that. So I don't know where Mr. McDonald got that. I'm not saying that it came from me. It did not come from me. I was not briefing the minister in the minister's office. Part number two, I was. You asked.
Let's jump in on that point specifically. So you're saying that you didn't have a direct conversation with Mr. Mendicino, but did somebody else tell you that Mr. Mendicino wasn't happy, and did you relay that information to Mr. McDonald? Because he all he said is that you said it. Did you in fact say what he says you said?
I do not recall saying that Mr. Mendicino or any relayed information would have come to me. And at that time, that was not the concern. Can I answer number two and three?
Do you recall at any point, do you recall being told at any point that Minister Mendicino was not happy?
Thank you for the question. No, I do not recall that. Can I answer two and three?
Could you go on with the other errors in his statement that you believe were made?
Number two, either I or the CFO would be fired. I had no fear for my job this time last year. I stand behind the decision. I think it's value for money, and I don't think at any point in time I was afraid for my job. I don't think a public servant doing their job, delivering on something like Arrivescam, would be fired.
Okay. And did you at any point tell Mr. McDonald that you would tell the committee that it was him who made the decision?
Thank you for that. I did not threaten to blame him, and I was here a week or two. I was here on October 24th, and I had an opportunity to do so with all the allegations around his name, and I still did not do so.
So you're suggesting that this conversation between you and Mr. McDonald is entirely fabricated?
Thank you for the question. I did have a conversation with Mr. McDonald. I did reach out to him. There's evidence of this. I reached out and asked him for facts and data because he was there at the time. I did have the conversation. The point of the conversation was help us understand who invited GC Strategies in to Arrivescam at the first time. We absolutely did have a conversation.
Okay, but these various particular points you're saying are not accurate. With respect to the minister's office, did you have any information shared with you about the perspective of the minister or the minister's office in relation to this procurement?
Thank you for the question. I do not recall anything from that perspective, or from the minister's office, or from the minister, and I was not briefing the minister on this topic.
Did you receive any direction along these lines regarding Deloitte, regarding the selection, regarding how people felt about it from Mr. Osowski, Ms. O'Gorman at any points?
I do not recall getting any direction on any of these matters. In terms of technical direction, this would not be something that a deputy minister would normally get involved in.
Okay, so to summarize your testimony, you were given two options. You knew that Deloitte was behind one of the options. You did not know that GC Strategies was behind the other. You chose the option for the company that involved a company that you weren't aware of. You don't know who made the decision regarding GC Strategies. You at no point heard from or consulted with your bosses within the department. And Mr. McDonald fully fabricated significant aspects of your conversation with him. I find that testimony quite unbelievable, frankly. But that's what you have to say?
Yes. And that is our time, Mr. Genuis. Perhaps, Mr. Doan, you can get back to us in writing on that. Mr. Joari, please go ahead for 6.
Thank you. One question on Arrivescam, and then I'll move to Butler. You talked about staff augmentation. Why wouldn't Deloitte consider, as a firm, to be able to provide staff for your staff augmentation?
Thank you for the question. Deloitte can provide, into my knowledge, in my experience with them, in terms of system integrators, major projects, major deliveries, hundreds of millions of dollars. To my knowledge, I do believe that's a service they do offer, but that is not what they bring in terms of value. They bring a whole solution. So what we have here with GC Strategies is a task base. You have an overall contract, then I need very specific rules. I need to define a statement of work. They divide the task. They provide the subject matter experts and the per diems, and they will move forward. Deloitte is more, I need an entire solution that may cost millions of dollars. They have the expertise to build a solution and maintain it.
Okay, I want to go now to Butler. Now, you mentioned, and there is an email dating back to November of 2019, where you had instructed Mr. McDonald to look for a vendor, and he suggested that he had found Butler, and you asked for a presentation, and a PowerPoint deck was sent to you, and you provided a feedback that it's slim on content, and it's basically restating the problem. And you instructed Mr. McDonald to go back and work with them to beef it up. Is this true?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. My recollection is this. Mr. McDonald found a company, Butler, that was highly interested. I trusted him. I trusted him enough from a technological standpoint in order to set up a meeting with them. I did have a meeting with them. They gave me, presented a demo of their solution. I was highly impressed by the demo, the technology, and thereafter I suggested we take that to the VP of HR. Unfortunately, then the pandemic struck. It took much longer than expected, and we decided that the solution presented enough promise to go forward with the pilot project.
Thank you. So you mentioned that you had agreed, you had recommended that they go forward with a pilot. And what's your definition of a pilot, sir?
Ma recommandation, si on présente ça au président.
My recommendation was to present it to the president. It wasn't for a pilot project per se.
Changes in terms of feasibility study and pilot. You'll see in my material the terms are used interchangeably. There are times that it's called a pilot, sometimes it's called a feasibility study. The nuance between the two, there is one, but it's very, very thin.
So based on the deliverable that was agreed, the 6 deliverables, do you think it was a pilot or do you think it was a feasibility study?
First deliverable, thank you for the question. The first deliverable is a feasibility study. But eventually, what you do from feasibility studies, you have a piece of technology to say, is this a viable technology? Does it work? Does it deliver? Does it meet the business requirements? Once you've generally said, and given the circumstances and other elements, it's not just a technical feasibility, then once you've decided, hey, this is possible, then you move to generally what's called a pilot. Let's pick a region, let's pick users, and let's see if in the real world it works, but not a full production solution.
One, deliverable 2, and paid for it. So the feasibility, which was deliverable 1, was approved, and whatever the scope of deliverable 2 was also approved. And based on Botler AI, they worked almost a year on working with CBSA very closely to capture all the policies to be able to put it into the application. And all of a sudden, things stop. Is that a true understanding of what we've heard in the committee?
Thank you for the question. My understanding of events was the client, in this case, Human Resources and Labor Relations, were dealing with the pandemic at the same time. And they did not have the time to dedicate the resources to this pilot, to the feasibility study, to the next step would have been a limited trial, but we did not get there. And it was not necessarily a reflection of Botler, but availability of the resources within HR to dedicate to properly engage in this pilot.
My understanding is that the subsequent 4 deliverables were prepared by Butler and was sent through GC strategy to CBSA, but they were not deemed of the quality accepted. Is this a true statement or not?
Thank you for the question. I only heard that at committee. I would refer that question back to CBSA.
Okay. When did you become aware of the, let's say, embellishment of the resumes of the 2 partners in the Botler AI?
Merci pour la question. J'ai appris ça.
Thank you. I learned it in the Globe and Mail. I can get back to you with the exact date, but it was when the article started to appear.
Okay. In your opinion, why was the project canceled?
Merci pour la question. Selon moi, c'est...
Thank you for the question. Well, because we didn't have enough time. I know that according to other testimony here, the product was not of sufficient quality, but I didn't have that information.
So I'd refer that back to the CBSA.
Thank you, Mr. Jawari. Before we finish up, Mr. Dwan, thanks for joining us today. You had mentioned earlier how Arrivescam saved lives. Would you provide in writing to us quantifying that statement? We've heard it repeatedly by people that witness stand about how it's miraculously saved lives. Could you let us know how many and quantify exactly how it saved lives if you're making that statement? And then please just get back to us in writing with that, please. Mr. Genuis, you have your hand up.
Yeah, Chair. I think we don't face the same resource constraints that we maybe normally do, and the witness has been fairly evasive, but has provided some somewhat more direct answers just in the last few minutes. I do wonder if there would be will of the committee to extend for another round and use the time we have while he's here. We can always call him back in the future, but I would suggest that we might use the time we have now to just go for another 20 minutes or so, get another round in.
Sure. Let me just canvass the room on availability, and if there's desire, Mr. Jawari.
Can we take a 2-minute recess?
Sure, why don't we suspend for a couple moments? To stay a bit longer, Mr. Genuis, it's been agreement we'll do 5 for the Conservatives, 5 for the Liberals, 2.5 for the NDP, 2.5 for the Bloc, and we will finish there. So, Mr. Genuis, why don't you go ahead for 5, please?
Well, thank you, Chair. Mr. McDonald also said during his testimony, quote, Mindone made the decision to go with GC strategies because of the fact that he had been told that he could not use Deloitte. Mr. Doan, was that statement by Mr. McDonald accurate?
Thank you for the question. I was never told not to use Deloitte.
Okay. Did you imply in conversation with Mr. McDonald that you've been told not to use Deloitte?
I did not imply not to use Deloitte. What I asked and what my concern was the outsource solution.
Okay. So you were presented with 2 options. You came back and you said, "Well, I prefer the partial option in effect." Now, did you ask any questions? Did you say, "Hey, could you explain why?" What companies might be behind it? Did you have any inkling what companies might be behind it? You didn't make any inquiries along those lines?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. These decisions, as you'll see in the material I will produce, were made in 24, 48, 72 hours. So I didn't decide to hire a company. I was wondering if we had the resources within government with staff augmentation to do it, and I decided that would give us more flexibility and more control. I didn't want to make a decision against Deloitte. I was against the complete outsourcing, which would not give us the required control and flexibility.
Thank you, sir. I'll jump in there. I think I understand what your testimony is in this regard. So effectively, you are pointing the finger at the implication of what you're saying is that Mr. McDonald repeatedly lied to this committee, whole hog fabricated events. You worked with Mr. McDonald a lot. Are you surprised by that? What's your response to having discovered that, in your view, he's presented testimony that isn't accurate?
Thank you for the question. I had a lot of trust in Mr. McDonald. He got a lot done over many years, and he helped put us on a path that allowed us to do Arrivescam. I was very disappointed and hurt and personally affected, and my career has been affected by some of the testimony that was provided. Now, there's a lot of, over the 2-hour period that Mr. McDonald was here, there was a lot said. I can't opine on every single statement, but some of them that were directed at me have personally affected me and my mental health since that time. I've been disappointed by it. I was surprised by it. That was not the Cameron McDonald or Mr. McDonald that I've worked with over many years. He was somebody that worked hard, as you will see from the emails, from 11 p.m. He'd work until 11 p.m. right until 7 a.m. and start again at 7 a.m. So I was disappointed and upset at that testimony.
Did you have a relationship with Mr. Firth at all?
Thank you for the question. I do not.
Have you ever met him?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I have.
Okay, how many times have you met him outside the office?
I have not met him outside the office. I met him he was present at the Botler demo in November, and I don't remember if he was virtual, but I believe it was so because it was pandemic. He was also present at the meeting where the demo was provided to the president.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Chair, we clearly have a significant conflict in terms of testimony between senior public servants, and I find this dynamic very, very disturbing. I'd like the committee to request phone records, text message records of conversations between Mr. Firth and Mr. McDonald, and any records that may exist between Mr. Firth and Mr. Dwan, dating back for the last 5 years. So phone and text message records between Mr. Dwan and Mr. Firth, and between Mr. McDonald and Mr. Firth, and that those would be provided to the committee within 2 weeks by the individuals on both ends of those exchanges. I hope I have agreement to the committee to make those requests.
Thank you, Mr. Genwis. I see thumbs up around the room. Wonderful. Our clerk has it all written down. He will follow up with the appropriate departments. Thanks very much. Mr. Jouari,
sorry,
please.
not departments, but individuals.
Yes, that too.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, Mr. Pawlowski, for 5 minutes, please.
Okay, Mr. Dwan. Now, do you hear me okay? Because I understand you haven't done the sound check on me. Is that a problem?
You're loud and clear.
Okay, Mr. Dwan, you've been asked to provide evidence that Arrivescam saved lives. Now, having studied public health, I would think that finding this kind of evidence is going to be very difficult. Always when you have a policy intervention on a macro level like that, finding proof that actually affected outcomes is going to be difficult, but I would suggest particularly so during a pandemic when there are all kinds of policy interventions taking place at the same time, to say what caused what is practically impossible. Now, let me ask you, Mr. Dwan, do you think that evidence is available to you to pass on to the committee?
Thank you for the question. No, I do not believe that evidence is available to me.
Now, Mr. Dwan, Mr. Genowis entered into his question the testimony of Mr. McDonald about what happened when they had the discussion about the discussion between you and Mr. McDonald as to who decided to choose GC strategies. In that, it was specifically mentioned something about somebody's head on the platter, Mr. Mendicino, who was going to take the fall for that. Now, you've said some of that isn't true, but you had that conversation. Could you tell me the contents of that conversation? I'm not sure how many months later you're going to recall all the specifics as to who said what, but can you let us know in general what that conversation was about?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I reached out and called Mr. McDonald and asked him for more facts and data in a period of time that was fairly poorly documented. We exchanged. I asked him the question, do you know? He said no. We did have a conversation where he proposed what I'm talking about today, which was, Min, you chose a strategic direction that led to GC strategies. I've had the same conversation here at committee, and I said, well, that's not a direct decision to choose GC strategies. We couldn't have come to an agreement on this very important difference. I said, if you can provide anything that you can, this is the situation that we face. I did say that if we can't come to a point where some more factual information and documentation is made available, I may have to refer him to the committee. And that is also a fact, and that was it.
Now, so from what you said, the point of contention in that meeting was who chose GC strategies. So when you actually talked, neither of you could decide who actually made that decision?
Thank you for the question. His point of view is because I picked a direction that I made the decision. After that, he wrote a note, and in that note that was meant for me to say, it says I was not aware of the GC Strategies company, and I quote, I was not part of the decision. That was his handwriting, his personal writing.
I being Mr. McDonald, he wasn't aware.
No, he wrote that for me. He was not going to that committee appearance.
Okay, so, and sorry if this question's come up before, it seems like the two of you were main actors in this. If it wasn't you, who could have made the decision?
Thank you for the question. The decision are two parts. One is technical. I've been clear. I made that decision. The other one is who called GC Strategies and asked them for a bid in the first place. I don't know who that is.
Okay. Mr. Jawari, do you have any other further questions?
No, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Garon for 2.5, please.
Mr. Dunn, it seems that this is a back and forth between you and Mr. McDonald. Mr. McDonald said that you made the decision. You say that you didn't take the decision, and yet you say that the buck stops with you. You're accountable. You have a funny definition of accountable, though. You're accountable for a decision, but not the decision-making process fully. Now, normally in this kind of process, you take the technical decisions, but under normal circumstances, who makes the decision to choose the company that will fulfill the terms of the contract? At what point in the process is that decision made? Thank you for the question. Well, it depends on the value of the contract, but it's a delegated manager who makes that decision. Well, in this particular case, that delegated manager is accountable to whom? Well, as I said, that delegated manager, as I said, well, I don't know who made the decision to call GC Strategies to call on them to bid. But normally, who does this delegated manager report to? Well, to his manager. But honestly, who's the manager in that case? Are you doing this on purpose? Honestly, I think you're a smart gentleman, and I think you can answer these questions. Who is this delegated manager reporting to? I am his manager. So you take a technical decision, and a company is chosen to spend public money, and then you have a delegated manager. And when I ask you the question, why do I have to ask you 4 times the same question? Someone who reported directly to you made the decision to choose the company. Is that correct? No. The way I understood the question, I apologize, is that who was delegating to who? And Mr. McDonald was the one who I delegated the responsibility to. So under normal circumstances, if I've understood correctly, you take the technical decision is made, and someone is delegated to make the following decision, and that person reports to you. Is that correct? Yes. So you could have found out more information, i.e. which company had been retained. It would have been possible for you to get your hands on that information. Is that correct? Well, there are several areas or levels of delegation. The delegate has the authority to make the decision without consulting me.
Mr. Johns, please, for 2.5.
Did the CBSA president task you or Mr. McDonald or anyone else with filling the CBSA's need in response to C-65? And what was the president's initiative?
Thank you for the question. It wasn't a task. At the end of a briefing with the executive committee around the sexual harassment cases that were happening around CBSA, he turned to myself as Chief Information Officer to say, are there innovative ways? So it was a question to look at what is out there in the industry that could potentially solve sexual harassment in a different way. Then I turned that to my DG of Innovation to look for a solution.
Okay. In terms of the back to the standard practices, we've heard about standard practices, and I find them outrageous when it comes to the procurement here. And PSPC admitted that there's literally no limit on the commission's contractors can pocket on government contracts. So if you've got a project like Botler software where the contractor takes 15 or 20%, the subcontractor takes another 15 to 30%, then the actual people doing the work get what's left. So say $100,000 of federal government money spent on a project like that, it could end up being only $56,000 actually goes to the project work. Now, the government could get the exact same thing for half as much based on that. And there are contracts with even more layers and steeper commissions than that, as you know. So the government's admitting they don't know how deep these commissions go. As the Treasury Board Secretary is mandated to make policy recommendations to protect tax dollars. As a CTO, will you do everything you can to stop this runaway graving train by imposing a limit on commissions? And why isn't the government hired its own IT recruiters? Like, by the numbers we're seeing, you could hire 10 IT recruiters at the governor general salary based on what GC Strategy's got and still save millions of dollars a year.
Thank you for the question. My role as Chief Technology Officer is setting enterprise direction on IT. There are different parts of the Treasury Board that set directives on expenditures and other policies. I can't speak on behalf of all of Treasury Board.
I find that hard to believe. As the CTO, you can't make recommendations to hire within house to save millions of dollars of taxpayer money and have those that expertise in house. You're saying that you have no say in it, no involvement in improving efficiencies and saving taxpayers' dollars.
Thank you for the question. In the technology direction and decisions and enterprise standards that I set, that is actually fundamental to what we do, not from a procurement perspective, but it also takes into account the different cloud technologies and others to ensure that what we deliver and the digital solutions that we deliver are delivered as effectively as possible. So absolutely taxpayer dollars is front and center in the technology perspective. The element around procurement is a different part of Treasury Board Secretariat and PSPC. But taxpayer dollars in terms of the investments and technology investments we make is front and center in everything that we do.
Thank you very much. And we are done with that round. Thank you, everyone, for your patience as always. Mr. Dwan, thank you for hanging around for an extra 25 minutes. Unless there's anything else, we are adjourned. Thank you.